we're in 11 Honors Lit Reviewing, and we're talking about war and the Civil War. What does Red Badge teach us about that? We heard that it's beautiful. How is it beautiful? We heard that Jameson said that the transformation that occurs in Henry Fleming is in a way beautiful. That's, again, that may not be the word you like or want to use, but I get the point. It's positive, very positive. Without the war, Henry Fleming may not have ever grown up. And I think I told you before we started that story, I never really got the answers, but I still like the question. Have you been through that thing yet? Some of you, you have. I've seen you grow up since 9th grade. You've changed, you've grown. We kind of celebrated that on Wednesday. Some of you, I'm not sure that that's happened yet. For me coming to, the high school was that thing. That really helped me grow up. And then going to college helped me grow up even more. That's not the question, but I think you could probably work it in, to say, but I mean, I wouldn't want you to get sidetracked, but I think when you talk about transformation, the point is, it takes events. It's usually not the day-to-day that causes us to grow up. It's usually some traumatic, serious event. Anything else, and we already talked about that, right? How did Henry grow up? I mean, what were the changes that occurred in him?
He wasn't a coward anymore.
Right, he didn't even know he was a coward. You see, he thought he was brave. Then he found out he wasn't brave. And then he became brave. So that was one of the things. What were you going to say?
I was basically just going to say what you said, but he goes from being such a younger kid almost who's obsessed with the idea of war to actually going to war and seeing what it's actually like, and literally he runs away from his problems. And then there's just one day he's transformed into this hero.
Yes, and what was it that did that? What was it about war? You said he was fascinated about war. What was he fascinated about war about?
The idea of just being a hero.
That's right. He wasn't really fascinated so much about war because he didn't know anything about war. He was fascinated about glory and about being a hero. He knew about that because, he'd gone to school, he had friends, everybody's trying to outdo each other.
I feel like he's kind of selfish because all he wanted was to be the hero.
So what was it that changed that? What was it that turned him into a hero? I'm not sure that a lot of you actually answered that very well on the test, so we want to make sure we answer it here. Can I guarantee that's going to be on the test? Yeah. Is it going to be on Mondays? I'm not telling you. But this question we got to answer. So what was it that changed him? That, again, we're answering 3 and 2 together. Like what's beautiful about what's war? Beauty. We're saying beauty is transformation. So explain how that happened. Yeah.
Well, through a lot of the traumatic experiences, seeing people shot down and dying near him, or running into one dead guy in the woods.
Okay.
Like in that clearing, that sort of transformed him. He ran back towards the battle.
Right.
Because he technically, I guess, saw that as a place of comfort. But,
Yeah, what was better about the battle? He just instinctively, when you run from something, you typically run in the opposite direction of it, right? So if the problem is here, I'm not gonna run there or there, definitely not gonna run here, I'm gonna run there. It just so happened that he had gone as far away from the battle as he could, and so in turning around and going the opposite direction, he was going back to the battle. But you're right, what was more comforting about the war than about what he was experiencing?
there are people.
Exactly. And if you don't include that in your answer, I don't think it's the best answer. One of the reasons Henry grew up was because before he wanted to be a hero, and you said he's selfish. Yeah, that's true. It was all about him. One of the things that helped him become a hero was what? When he turned around and ran back to the battle, who did he end up seeing?
Jim Conklin.
And all those other guys, the tattered soldier who were all hurt. He goes back and he sees them, and when he finally decides to fight, what is one of the motivations? It's not to be a hero. that was not the motivation when he became a hero, was because he stopped trying to be a hero.
Was it hate for the enemy?
Right, because what was the enemy doing?
Wounding, like, his friends.
All these guys, and they're gonna push us in the river, he kept saying that. The river was right behind us, they're gonna drive us back in the river, and he got sick and tired of it. And so there was a combination of, you're doing this to us, instead of, like you said, being selfish and wanting just to become a hero. Now, he has a specific reason, and Jim Conklin had a lot to do with that. I'd also be disappointed if you didn't mention, what is Jim's role? Like, Jim's death is the significant turning point in the story.
Be like a
Is he
father
like the
figure.
Jesus figure?
He's a
Like
Jesus
Christ
figure,
figure.
but in what way?
He died so that Henry could be reborn.
Okay, how does that work? How did his death cause Henry's rebirth?
You could say his death matured him in a way.
How?
Because his death made him think of the enemy in a different way.
Which was
caused him-
what?
Which caused him to, like, fight.
Yeah, what was the different way he saw the enemy?
Yeah, anger.
He hated him, because this guy, I knew, the guy that, all the people that were being shot the first day when he ran away, we don't know their names. Maybe people he didn't even know. So he was just afraid of death. Now you killed one of my people. You killed my friend. And I'm angry at you. And to me, that's the pivotal turning point of his growth, because he had to forget the selfishness to being a hero, and he had to fight for his buddies. And he have a reason now really to fight for, yeah.
Did you say like he wasn't afraid of death, but then like that changed his mindset? He was
Yeah.
so driven by hatred that he didn't even face it.
So hatred replaces fear of death. Now he's not afraid of death. Why is he not afraid of it?
So distracted by the Bible. I just
You're right, he's distracted by what?
His hatred, like he just
Right.
wants.
Yeah, he's now distracted from it. You could almost argue that death now becomes an obstacle, not what we think of it as the end of my life. The only reason I fear death is because I can't shoot that guy. I had some over here, I'll find it eventually. But it's a true statement. I think I may have mentioned it. This Marine general in the Korean War found out that his unit was surrounded, and he says, "This is great. It solves the problem. It solves our problem of finding the enemy and killing them. Now we can shoot in any direction." He said, "They can't get away this time." Most of us would be worried about, oh, we're surrounded, we're hopelessly lost. And so his response was, these people are an obstacle. Now he made something positive out of a negative. So we're going back to the idea of transformation. It was the death of Henry that basically transformed, it's the death of Jim that transformed Henry, because he now is angry at the enemy. And the enemy is an obstacle now. And so he gets, and I like what you said, distracted. I like what Ben said about selfishness. He's no longer selfish. Can we add one more thing to that? After he was a hero and, advanced and all that, and everybody was looking at him like who are you, Henry? Are you okay, Henry? This is not the Henry we are used to seeing. Remember, they go back to get water, and what do they hear back there that further transforms Henry?
Oh, was it that, like, they were gonna get rid of their, like regiment? Or,
Well, explain what you mean by that.
like, the person in charge was gonna get rid of certain soldiers? Or am I making that up?
You're actually just sort of right, but I don't think you know why you're right.
Yeah.
What does he mean? They were gonna get rid of them in a way. Remember what that was about? Yeah.
Just like throw them out there because they don't think.
Throw them out where?
Like in the battle.
they were gonna charge from the front of the line. They were gonna be the tip of the spear. And the reason they were gonna charge, because they didn't think they could lose them, they didn't care. And remember what he called them? Mule drivers. Yeah, he called them mule drivers. They're not even soldiers, they're just mule drivers. And how did that further transform Henry?
Oh, give him motivation to prove the general's wrong.
Yeah, now he has a different motivation again. One is to get the enemy. Now he's angry at his officers who don't respect us. They're calling us mule drivers. That really makes me mad. And now who's he concerned about? Is he concerned about himself anymore? They called us mule drivers. Who's he concerned about now?
His regiment.
His regiment. So now he has the motivation to become a hero. He's fighting for his buddies. He's fighting for his regiment's honor. And the rest of the story is that. So going back to the theme of transformation, there are two events that you've got to include. I don't want to make it complicated, but if he hadn't been hit on the head, none of that would have happened, right? How did the book is entitled The Red Badge of Courage. How did he get it? You remember how he got the red badge?
He was standing somewhere, and there was a bunch of the regiment that he had seen marching towards the battle. That same regiment was just running back in frantic retreat, and he was trying to grab one of the guys and ask him what happened. The guy panicked and just hit him over the head with the butt of his rifle.
And so that helped what happened? A couple of things.
Well, he got the red badge.
He got his wound that he wanted, yeah.
And then he was knocked out, and then forget what position the guy was in another regiment. Found the cheery soldier.
Right.
Found him, and then asked him his regiment and stuff, and took him back to his old regiment.
Right. So it further illustrates the point that Henry couldn't change alone. He had to have somebody help him. In this case, it was the cheery soldier, and even Wilson had changed. When he got back to the unit, Wilson, remember, he was friendly, he was kind, he was patient, the guy who was just a loudmouth boaster yesterday, and that helped him change. The fact he had the head wound, that helped him change, because now no one was gonna ask him if he was a coward. What do you mean coward? Look at this. You know, I got a wound to show it. So all of these can answer 3, and they can answer actually 2 as well. Remember, war and Civil War. Can I mention a couple other things? Go back to Robbie's comment about beautiful. The odd thing about the way the book is written is within all the blood and all the smoke and the carnage, you have glimpses of blue skies, green grass, there's clouds in the sky. So nature goes on. Nature is still beautiful. What might that teach you about his view of war? The author's view of war. That within this horrible carnage, there's actually, nature seems to be ignoring it. What does that say about his view of life?
Life goes on.
Yeah, and that maybe even God's ignoring it. In fact, as a transcendentalist, not a transcendentalist, but a naturalist, he believed that God didn't care. That if he existed, he was just watching, and he didn't care. Just like nature is just kind of watching, it's not caring. So that's another view of life. So we've actually, remember how confused it was? That's another part of that answer for number 2. How is it realistic? We did this the other day. Again, I'm not sure 1 and 2 could stand on their own. That might help you study it. I'm not sure I'd feel comfortable. I've got 16 questions here, but I'm not sure any particular one is about number 2. You know, like that would be combined with some others. So what is realistic about the story? Do you remember realism?
And just like,
What?
and it's just sort of like, I don't know, everything's really real. It's just like inside his head, it's like his thoughts and everything.
All right, let's see what these they have. You're not wrong.
Like the author focuses on like the privates of the war, like rather than like the heroes and like the generals. Is that right?
That's exactly right, because realism focuses on the regular people, not the general officers and people like that. So that's why all the main characters are not the general. We don't know any, Witterside, I think, is the only general. He's made up. He's not a real guy. He's the only name of an officer, yeah.
Also, the, book, like, or the battle that takes place is like an actual battle, it's the Battle of Chancellorsville.
Yes. I'm glad you mentioned, I almost forgot that one. Payne. All right, Chancellorsville, it is probably the Battle of Chancellorsville. It's not a battle that he mentions by name. Do you remember the similarities? Yes,
The battle was only 2 days.
yes. It was in early spring, or in spring. It involved a lot of new regiments, and in the battle, in the book, his army has to go down the river and come back behind them. Remember, that was one of the stories that the rumor was, we're gonna go back and get behind, go down the river and come behind them. That actually is what happened at Chancellorsville. And so all those suggest, and why did he choose Chancellorsville? Because his hometown would have had soldiers that fought in that battle when he interviewed them. He was too young to fight in the Civil War. So he wrote this in the 90s, 1890s. The war was the 1860s. So he was in his late 20s. When he made, I don't even think he was born yet. When was he born? Do you have that? Any of you have that? Stephen Crane? I don't even know. I don't have it. I can look it up. But anyway, so realism is about the details. It's about the common people. War is about the confusion, but the beauties, oddly, and the great theme of transformation. That's the big one there. So if you know the book and you know these themes, you're gonna be able to hopefully think on your feet, for both mine and for hers. How about, the poetry of Whitman and Dickinson? We did go over this the other day. Do you have any questions about that? I might put them together, I might not, because you need, you know, if I were you, I would want to have a question that was broad enough for me to talk about, not so tiny that you can only think of 2 things and you got 3 minutes to talk about it. So I'm gonna try not to do that to you. So we can go past Whitman and Dickinson. Jekyll and Hyde, I'd love to hear out of someone, the number 7, because you know how important, how much emphasis I put on that. Can you discuss, in fact, can you talk for 3 minutes? Be a good way to practice of what do I mean by that? That's not a question, but that is the thing. You know, we compared Paul and Jekyll, Robert Louis Stevenson's attitude toward sin. Would you like to do that?
Yeah, just sort of summarize it. With Paul, he trusted in
I'm
God.
timing, just seeing how long you can talk about it.
So with Paul, he gave up all his sins to God and then said, take care of these sins. I cannot handle this on my own, and I do not want to experience these sins as they appear. Whereas with Dr. Jekyll, he physically separated out the good and the evil because he liked the sin, but he wanted to experience the sin and do all the sinful stuff with what he thought without having guilt in the good persona, Dr. Jekyll. But it ended up not being that way because in the end of the book, he has no control over, when he switches back and forth. So sin just ended up taking over him. The pure sin that he isolated out became too powerful and overtook Dr. Jekyll. And because he was trying to solve a moral problem with science, which I think is the next bullet. But he attempted to solve a moral problem with science, which doesn't work. And I don't know if God was mentioned. It may have been.
I don't think so. That's a good point.
Mr. Hyde, but if he had followed Paul's route and gave up his sins to God and said, take my sins, I cannot handle them, then he wouldn't have the problem, and he would just be able to just pass off, and as long as he didn't have the desire to do sinful things, he could just pass off all that guilt and stuff to God.
All right, that's a minute and 30, and you haven't mentioned any details which you would wanna do, to if you had to stretch that to 30 minutes. My question at this point would be, how did Paul, I didn't hear you say this, so you might have, just to reiterate, how did Paul feel about his sin? You said that Jekyll wanted to sin.
Paul hated the sin.
Right. That's a huge difference. Paul, Jekyll wanted to accommodate the sins, and I think you were smart to include, you were smart to include the, I forget now what it was, that, the purpose behind separating them.
So it was so
Right.
that he could do all the sinful stuff without, what he thought was without guilt
That's
on
right.
the good side, which
Right.
ended up not being what happened.
Right. That's a really good short answer. Now, that's 2.5 minutes, but you only have 30 more minutes, 30 seconds, you mean. So you only had 30 more seconds to, to fill in those details. That's a big one. So please understand that. If you don't get it on Monday, I almost guarantee you'll get it on Tuesday, and by the way, there are gonna be some options Tuesday. I'm gonna give you more questions than you need to answer. But again, you're only gonna have an hour, or relatively speaking, an hour to do mine and an hour to do hers. We talked about it yesterday. We were both wondering how, should we include this? So we're aware that you're limited by time. It's over an hour, it's over 2 hours, like 2 hours and 15 minutes, but. What about the theme of the double? You know what I mean by that? Well, obviously, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde are two people. They're not really, they're one person, but they're two people out of one. So this person, Jekyll, has another person in it. Where do you see that in Heart of Darkness? Where do you see, and this goes down to number 14, the contrast. That would be another way to say the double. So where do you see pairs of people or places or things in Heart of Darkness? And what would you say about those pairs? Yes.
I don't know what I would say, but I know there were like the two ladies in the office in Belgium.
I forgot there were two.
They're supposed to represent the faiths.
Yeah. So what other pairs do you see there? Not just people, but places and maybe ideas, yeah.
The wilderness and the civilization.
All right.
It was ironic kind of because the cannibals were the most civilized and
Because, what made them
because
civilized?
they're known for eating people, but they actually didn't eat people
Right.
because they had self-restraint.
Yeah.
And
What else did they do that was admirable to Marlowe? Why were they on that boat? Why were they on the ship? They were the crew of the ship, so they actually had a job to do. Remember, what does Marlowe think about people that work?
he
Respects.
Why?
because they finished the job.
It's all about purpose, right? It's all about, work gives you meaning. And so they were respectable. In fact, the Pilgrims, the opposite of those people would be the so-called civilized people, right? Remember the Pilgrims? What did they do? What was their work?
Not much.
That's the right answer, right? If you didn't say anything, that would have been the right answer. They didn't have a job. They were just wanderers. They were people that just, wasted, they had no meaning. And you remember how they treated the natives? They didn't even aim at them. They didn't put the gun up to their shoulder and find somebody and shoot them. At least there would be some intent there. They would fire from the hip. Just wantonly, they're too lazy to pull the gun up to their shoulder. They would just pull the trigger out of fun. Let me see if I can kill. But they weren't serious enough to actually aim it and kill somebody. Not that that's better, but he was just pointing out how lazy they were. So contrast the civilized and the uncivilized. We just mentioned two groups, the Pilgrims and the cannibals. What other examples of civilized versus uncivilized do you see there? Like, what was the civilized country or continent? Europe. And what was the uncivilized continent? Be Africa. But, you know, what we're saying, what happens to the civilized people like Kurds? They become uncivilized when they go to Africa. The darkness wins. And is Africa where darkness resides? No, there's no geographical place for it. Where else in the book does darkness reside, according to Marlowe? In fact, the first words out of his mouth are, here too. I can't remember, I can't quote it, but here too, he said something about darkness, and where was he at the beginning of the book? The Thames River. So when he says there was darkness here too, what country is he talking about? He's talking about England. So England is not the heart of darkness, and Africa is not the heart of darkness. Remember the Brussels, which is part of Europe, is Belgium. But what was it called? A what? Remember the white sepulchral city? Remember sepulchral means tomb? And Jesus referred to whitewashed tombs in Jesus' parables. So it was whitewashed, notice the color, white, but it was really dark, because they're the ones that were bringing all this devastation. So you see how that works? The two rivers were two different rivers, but they're very much alike. How was the Thames like the Congo? Yeah.
Well, aren't both of them imperialist?
Yes. Explain.
Like imperialist things were happening on both of them. Like
Yes. Explain.